In 2018, Melissa Hogan approached financial guru Dave Ramsey and 2 board members with evidence her husband was having adulterous affairs. At the time, her husband, Chris Hogan, was a star Ramsey personality, and according to Ramsey, his company has a policy forbidding immorality.
We have a moral code of conduct at our office. I fire people if they have extramarital affairs.
But instead of firing Chris Hogan, Melissa says Ramsey and the board protected Chris and displayed hostility towards her and her claims. In a podcast with her friend, Amy Fritz, Melissa described the experience.
It was like being emotionally raped, and I don't use that description lightly. And it was basically, what other false accusations do you have?
Chris Hogan remained at Ramsey Solutions until resigning in 2021 for, quote, some things personally that are not in line with Ramsey Solutions, unquote. But for 3 years leading up to Hogan's resignation, Ramsey painted Melissa as an angry, bitter spouse.
Before the book tour started, Melissa, who I've known, Chris's wife, for many years, came in unannounced right after I got off the radio show without an appointment, and demanded very angrily to see me and began to accuse Chris of doing all kinds of things.
But when announcing Chris's sabbatical for undisclosed reasons, Ramsey painted Chris as a thoroughbred horse who just doesn't have an off button and needs a break.
Nothing earth-shattering or evil or something like that, but, you don't kill a thoroughbred. You don't kill them just because they don't have an off button. And so he's going to grow an off button while he's home. He and I have been talking about this, and Jeremy, and some of us that are real close to him and so forth. So he is a good man, and you're not going to see him for the month of February.
For years, Ramsey and his board maintained that there was no clear evidence that Chris Hogan had committed adultery. But then, in 2022, the Royce Report received audio of a meeting between a Ramsey employee and 2 Ramsey board members with a stunning disclosure. The board had known Chris Hogan was an adulterer a decade earlier. This is Ramsey board member Mike Finney.
So we do know that Chris had intercourse with a former team member over 10 years ago.
Yeah.
All these events, the adultery and then the hypocrisy and gaslighting by a company that claimed to be Christian, exacted a heavy toll on Melissa Hogan. But as she discloses for the first time in the talk you're about to hear, there was more. Melissa and her sons were victims of abuse by Chris. Melissa's road to healing has been incredibly painful and hard. It's required courage, perseverance, and risk. But as only someone who's truly suffered and overcome can do, Melissa offers a roadmap for other survivors to follow in this powerful talk.
At 2:20 a.m. on the morning of January 5th, 2019, I sat on my couch in a dark house and booked a flight to take off only 5 hours later. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. Although I already had a caregiver sleeping in the next room, arranged to stay with my kids, that was only because the plan had been for me to travel with my then husband on a work trip for his book tour over the next several weeks. Instead, I flew alone to a foreign country that I'd never been to, climbed into a cab ride that had me holding on, and spent the next 5 days having conversations with God that would change my life. Those 5 days began my search for safety after realizing that I had been drowning in a confusing and abusive morass that had been my 20-year marriage to a personality in the self-described world of God's way of handling money. At one point in my trip, I anonymously emailed 2 survivor advocates with some of my story, asking if I was crazy, if there was hope, if my fears were well-founded. I imagine many of you have been in similar places. At another point, I told a close friend that if it was too costly for her to remain my friend, I would understand, given her husband's employment at the same Christian employer and the known requirement for loyalty. She was among only a handful of people who, until only recently, had learned any details of what my life looked like inside the walls of my home, what voices sounded like on private calls and in meetings, what the darkness of my closet felt like when I would retreat in there to try to sort through the chaos of a mind that couldn't make sense of what I was seeing versus what I was being told, what was said publicly versus what was said and done privately. She may never know how important her response was to me, that she knew that God would take care of them, that standing with me was never in question. I don't know if she yet realized, though, that she and her husband would end up being willing to sacrifice their family's security and friendships and community to hold on to that promise and to their own integrity. She was the safe person I needed in that moment. There were some before her, my therapist, who had a funny way of crooking her head at an angle when I would describe certain behaviors or play her a recording, an expression I later learned to be associated with her processing extreme situations I was describing as if they were completely normal, because they were normal to me. And the women's leader at my church to whom I first said the word abuse. There were some after her, my friend who lived with us for 2 years to help me care for children feeling the effects of a lifetime of trauma. And then the friend who quietly showed up week after week at my son's flag football games and who later peeled me up off the floor more times than I can count, all while dealing with her own grief and trauma and sacrifice. What is a safe person? What is a safe person to me, to you? Can someone be objectively safe, or safe to one and a little or a lot unsafe to another? When we first realize we are dealing with a harmful or abusive situation, and especially as we work desperately to peel ourselves out of its tentacles, it is not uncommon that we shrink our world. We contract to an inner circle of people who seem to get it, people who love us unconditionally, who believe us and stand by us. My hope is that we all have or have had such people. But even if there's only one, that can be enough. Maybe that one person is here. It's not unlike when we have a severe injury and the muscles around the injury contract and stiffen and attempt to protect the injured place. Often doctors immobilize the area after an injury or a surgery to attempt to enforce that protection for a time through a sling or a brace or a cast. The strict boundaries are necessary for healing to begin. Sometimes we are the unsafe person. Sometimes we are the unsafe person to ourselves. The rate of suicidality of victims of abuse is high. I've come to see suicidal ideation during and after abuse as an extreme flight response, a desperate attempt to escape. After sitting in a domestic abuse support group almost every Thursday for the last 5 years, I have heard countless examples of admissions to psychiatric hospitals, emergency therapy sessions, and suicidal ideation. Some of that was me. And sometimes we allow others to bear the responsibility unfairly for keeping us safe. Owning that is part of my story and confession. There are numerous points in my story where the option of not living seemed better than the very few options I had. We don't talk enough about this very real issue among survivors. The idea, though, of someone, even each of us, being objectively safe all the time for everyone, everywhere, is elusive. So what do we do when we feel surrounded by the idea of unsafe people? We form a cocoon of community that we identify or create to insulate ourselves from the dangers we had previously experienced. The survivor community, whether in domestic abuse, sexual abuse, spiritual abuse, the community we find at Restore is a picture of that cocoon in some ways. The metaphor of a cocoon is not new in Reflections on Abuse. We all want to believe in the future where we are butterflies, transformed with no residual ugliness or baggage from our prior state, beautiful and free, light and floating on the air, choosing where we get to fly next. Is that realistic or even possible? Yes and no. Every animal that cocoons, it is for protection and to transform. Cocoons protect us from predators and a harsh environment. Cocoons also create the right environment for transformation, metamorphosis. The time any insect spends in a cocoon varies and can range from only a few days to several months. The average time for a caterpillar in a chrysalis is 2 weeks, but some emerge in 10 to 12 weeks. And some butterflies will stay in their chrysalis throughout winter. This is known as diapausing. Cocoons are also made in different ways by different insects. Moths spin cocoons out of silk and combine it with leaves. Caterpillars form a chrysalis from their own modified skin that hardens around them. Caddisflies use silk to glue together sand and debris to create a little house. I may be a caterpillar. You may be a caddisfly. I may diapause for years or decades. You may transform in only months. In the meantime, our psychological or community cocoons can be places of being held, protected, and allowed to grow and change. Many times our lives are too chaotic, or we have no means to form that cocoon, and we continue on without even realizing the need to grow or heal. Or we can look at someone else's cocoon and wish ours were also made of silk. We might wish we didn't diapause, but there is no more glory in the cocoons on this stage than there is for the ones in the back row or lingering in the lobby. But once we hit that moment and the cocooning begins, we often create a hard shell, and we can tend to see the world as those inside and those outside. Those inside are safe, and those outside are dangerous. They don't understand. We may create reflections of the same black and white mindset that we left in the abusive environment. We shrink our world of who we confide in, who we trust, because we've learned that people we thought we could trust are not trustworthy. So we question ourselves and our judgment. We reevaluate the people in our life. We make our cocoons small, people who can help hold our pain as we transform. That small group understands our experience in ways that others may not. Our cocoon can be dark. The immaterial falls away. We care less about things that don't relate to making it through the day or the week or the month. We see possibilities of the future through pinpricks of light, liminal spaces between the darkness of where we are and the lightness we see in others further along down the path than we are. The cocoons I've described are sheltering, transformational environments. There is a temptation to enshrine any cocoon with some special significance. To see it as interlaced with golden threads and sparkling with gems, it just seems safer to relax within it, away from the risks or the threats that we had encountered before. A cocoon, a safe community. We sometimes forget that often the first community we went to, the first place maybe we disclosed our abuse, was a community that we had also thought was safe. Whether it was our church, a self-described Christian workplace, or even just a single individual like our pastor or a family member. The control and silencing, the betrayal trauma can be at a level equal to or greater than the original abuse itself. So many of us don't hope or expect another community to offer us safety for a long time. There are unhealthy cocoons. In an abdominal cocoon, the small bowel becomes encased by a thick and fibrotic membrane. Instead of protective, that cocoon attacks and strangles. I looked at photos and decided against putting them on the screen. Like any community, our church or a Christian employer, the survivor community bears similar risks in that it is a man-made, imperfect place. Like the community we came from, where harmful and unhealthy people could hide because they could say the right things and blend in enough to get by, the same thing can happen here. Like all of life, even where there is no abuse, there is a spectrum of behavior from healthy to unhelpful to unhealthy and harmful. In addition to that, this room and others like it are filled with people who have borne similar pain, who bear matching scars of trauma, who are in various stages of tiptoeing around our trauma, experiencing it rise up, and hopefully in intentionally working on healing it. And because we are human, we also bear the weight of other experiences that are painful in our life. So then what do I do? Where do I go? Is there no safe place? We have to get back to the purpose of a cocoon. Do you know that no two cocoons are alike? The role of a cocoon is for protection and transformation, and that looks different for each of us. But one commonality is the overarching view of what healing looks like: growth and change. There is no perfect safety, but there are pockets of goodness and purpose in healing. I'll say that again. There is no perfect safety, but there are pockets of goodness and purpose in healing. Our healing should move us towards growth in our discernment, in seeing and understanding abuse and aspects of unhealthy cultures, not just out there, but in here and in here. I sometimes fear that when we come from a place, a relationship or community that caused us to unjustifiably question ourselves, our understanding, our memory, our motives, where there is abusive and oppressive silencing, and our healing involves recalibrating to stand in our knowledge of what we know to be true and right and healthy, where we have to insist, we are not imagining this, we are not crazy, that we may swing too far and become fixed in that one attitude of being right. That at some point, our own rightness can become oppressive. That our fear of unjustifiably questioning ourselves will prevent us from appropriate self-reflection on our actions, our motives, and our role in institutions and exchanges. What is our heart? How do we respond when we receive pushback? If I'm making you uncomfortable, then I am succeeding at one thing I meant to do. I want us to always be a little uncomfortable about whether or not we are right. There is a middle ground of recognizing and standing against abuse and also holding space for our own real and ongoing failings as sinful people that we may not always want to see. Our healing should also move us towards growth in our understanding and expanding our psychological window of tolerance, knowing that we will encounter unhealthy people and environments again, and how to navigate that. Our healing should also move us towards growth in our compassion and love, both for others and also particularly for ourselves, and in our wisdom for how to navigate while holding grace the nuances of this life. And this is where the cocoon analogy breaks down, as any good metaphor eventually does. Unlike a moth or a butterfly, there is not a moment where we emerge. There is not a moment where we are suddenly transformed or healed, either from our abuse or from the harsh events that might otherwise happen in our lives. This life is not a safe life. It is not completely safe to be in relationship with anyone. We will bump up against other traumatized people, even just here this weekend. We should feel a little uncomfortable, not always agreeing, not always seeing the world the same way, having different emotions and different perceptions. The continuum of traumatized people, all of us being a little unhealthy in some ways, up to those who are actively harmful, is a wavy line. We can each continue to grow in discernment and in our understanding of trust, boundaries, repentance, and grace. This room is full of hurting people. This world is full of hurting people. Frankly, it's not surprising that sometimes we bleed all over one another. It is not safe to be in the world. We will encounter other abusive people no matter how much we learn and grow. I watched cult and abuse documentaries for over 2 years, trying to make sense of what happened to me and prevent it from ever happening again. I hoped to be able to identify such a person or such a place. I wanted to memorize the signs. And while I think there are signs, I also thought I had to isolate from anyone that I didn't know was completely safe, to increase my odds of remaining safe. But that wasn't a safe life either. I lost the living part. It is also not safe to attempt to hold people accountable. It's not safe to attempt to hold people accountable with grace, and all the while continuing to hold space to love them and examine our own motives and health. It's not safe to hold both a sense of justice alongside a sense of self-reflection, where we can continue to take account of our own imperfections. Our relationship with God, on some level, is not meant to be safe. Safe? Who said anything about safe? Of course he isn't safe, but he is good. When my youngest son was 2 years old, he was diagnosed with a rare genetic disorder. His prognosis was a lifespan of approximately 15 years old. I grieved so intensely. Eventually, I formed a foundation in his disease, and we raised money for research. I tried to do something positive with my grief. I thought I understood grief. And I had a full bookshelf on the subject. I wrote a book about medical trauma to help my son and other families navigate a topic that had gone fairly unaddressed for parents and healthcare providers. Then in 2018, my life again turned upside down as I learned of multiple new affairs by my husband. Realized that what I and my children had been experiencing as confusion and fear and bullying for years was in actuality known by another name: abuse. My then husband's self-described Christian employer then attempted to bully me and manipulate me into silence with phrases like, "Let the Holy Spirit do something." Controlling efforts to choose them over my family, expectations of turning over therapy records, a gag order, and legal maneuvering, including lying to a judge and withholding documents. I did my best to protect and help my kids and support their healing. But abuse, as many of you know, has devastating effects. In August of 2023, I got the call that no parent wants or expects. My middle son was found unresponsive from an accidental overdose. My son and I, we had matching scars on our hands between our thumbs and index fingers. They were from a time when we were attempting to replace the pane of glass on the garage door, and it slipped. My son and I, we had matching scars. The people in this room have matching scars. For 2 days, I sat in a chair and I traced our physical scars together as if I could keep them intertwined and I could continue to pour my life into his. But soon after, I sang him the same lullaby I sang to him as a child. And I had no choice but to say goodbye. My battle for his healing, for his safety, for the protection that he had begged me for was over. This side of heaven, there is not a moment where we are finally and completely safe. One thing I realized in therapy over the years is that once the fight or flight mode kicks in, sometimes if we can't fight or solve the real problem, which often is our own grief or sadness or pain or lament, we unwittingly fight a host of surrogate problems or people that we may not even need to or want to fight. The instinct to do something is so strong. Maybe we're fighting to get out of a cocoon that we need to stay in. Maybe we're fighting to return to our old life, to the caterpillar state, and we don't even notice that now we actually have wings. Maybe we don't know what those wings feel like, and we're sitting on the branch of a tree, afraid that we're going to fall. I used to think that the final stage of healing was making something positive out of our painful experience. I no longer think that's always necessary. Imagine the butterfly trying to put her chrysalis back together to carry it around. Sometimes there is horrible pain in our lives that will never make sense this side of heaven. Sometimes there is grief for what we have lost or who we have lost that will never feel healed. Sometimes our exhausting search for safety ends when we realize that we simply cannot find a completely safe life, and we choose to live it anyway. Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening to this session of Restore 2025. As you know, a lot of conferences charge for resources like these, but we've decided to make them available for free because we don't want money to stand in the way of ministry. That said, these do cost money to produce, and we also feel God calling us to expand our ministry and our production of resources. So if you believe in what we're doing here at the Roys Report, would you please consider donating to support us? To do that, just go to julieroys, spelled ROYS.com/donate. That's julieroys.com/donate. Again, thanks so much for listening. Hope you were blessed and encouraged.